Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program The Journey Begins Part 9. You join us here for a quick recap just to finish what we started last time out. Valentina Kerman is in the command seat for this one and she is joined by two new faces. Bargil Kerman is our new engineer and in the scientist seat is Johnny Kerman. Now there's a name you could shave with. Anyway, we push on into orbit and now it's time to reveal our cargo. It's the emergency return vehicle for the space station. I think I'll say ERV from now on for the sake of brevity. Anyway, Valentina has no trouble getting that docked. And before too long we find ourselves circularizing our orbit. And then it's time to push on towards our rendezvous with the space station. The ERV at the moment contains the first contingent, the first permanent residents aboard the Aristotle space station. They'll be led by Jebediah, of course, and joined by Bob, and another new face, Gwenby Kerman, our brand new scientist. Anyway, we come in just by the space station before Valentina makes her way across, just to steady the Aristotle in case of any docking mishaps, but with Jebediah at the helm there certainly won't be this time out. So anyway, Valentina makes her way back to the Brunel orbiter. Before that too makes its way in and docks with the space station. From here on in we use the orbiter just to top up the tanks of the ERV, and then after that it's time for our first proper crew to make itself at home. Jebediah makes his way into the command seat, and Bob and Gwenby make their way into the science lab, and now it's time for our orbiter crew to say goodbye to their fellow astronauts and leave them to settle into the space station while they begin to make their own way back home to the surface of Kerbin. So Bargil and Johnny get their first taste of re-entry fire, and I'm sure they're more than a little relieved when, before too long, they find themselves back on solid ground. So now we have a crewed science station in orbit, I suppose it's time we actually give it some science to do. And straight onto that task immediately are three fine young Kerbals. Fine Young Kerbals, that sounds like a good name for a band. Anyway, Kerdard Kerman is here for her first mission in charge. She's joined by Bill, the old hand, who's going to be our engineer for this one, and filling the scientist role is Johnny Kerman. Now there's a name you could use to chop down a tree. I'm going to run out of these so quickly, I don't care, I'm going to keep going. This is done at 4 times time acceleration, yeah, seen it before, blah 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 blah. Yes, the Brunel Mark I, so solid and dependable a vehicle, giving us such much-needed heavy lifting capabilities to our space program pushing on here. Our first stage burns out here, and we fire up that second stage, pushing us further, pushing us onwards, pushing that apoapsis higher and higher, giving us enough time to turn around, grab our payload, and then circularize our orbit. It's a heavier payload this time around. You might have noticed the 6 SRBs needed on that first stage to lift it. So what do we have hidden behind that almost sane-looking fairing for once? Well, for an explanation of today's mission, I'm going to hand us back to past me. Right, so let's get that fairing deployed. And now we can turn around and, well, you know the drill by now. Let's decouple this node. Let's turn on the LCS. And whilst I'm doing it, I'll explain today's mission. I suppose I should start from the start. Let's start at the very beginning. That's a very good place to start. And if there are any musical fans out there, if there aren't, well, as is probable, I entirely understand. Yes, we now have a science lab in orbit, and the science lab is a very useful thing. Let's make sure we're controlling from here. Let's set this as our target. We're still moving away, so we want to sort of arrest that, and we can start thrusting. What happens with the science lab, I'm sure, as I said, most of you will be familiar with it, but just for those that aren't, let's turn off the RCS whilst it stabilizes, because otherwise it's going to drive me mad. There we go. The science lab, you bring it science experiments, you do science and then bring it back to the science lab, or you do the science experiments with a part that's attached to the same craft as the science lab. And you, as well as the sort of keep, bin and transmit options you normally get for science, you also have the option to convert it into data for the science lab. And the science lab then converts that data back into science, so it's like science to data to science. And some of you might be asking, well, what's the point of that? Well, the point is you get back much more science than you started with. I think it's about 5 times as much. I'm not sure the exact figure, but the downside is that it takes time. Each lab can process each unique biome experiment only once, so you can't do multiple experiments like that in the science lab. But that's for each lab, so you can just, like, say, take a mystery goo experiment from Mimus's Greater Flats and take it to one lab, and that'll process that. And you can take another mystery goo sample from Mimus's Greater Flats to another lab and do it like that. And you can take it again to a third lab and a fourth lab and a fifth lab, and, well, the whole thing can get a bit exploity. Let's turn that off there and just decouple you. And then we just turn our CS thrusters back on just to back away a little bit from that vehicle. And then we can get ourselves turned about, ready to circularize our orbit. As I said, that you can get really sort of exploity with that mechanic, but I'm not going to do that here. But the other interesting thing is processing the data on an experiment doesn't count as having done the experiment. So once you've taken it to the lab, you can sort of then also collect another set of the entire same experiments and then just take it back home as usual. And you just get, the science normally that way, without any penalties or any reductions. And not only that, but if you have done any experiments in the past, sort of that doesn't count as having been processed for the sake of the lab. So you can then go and do those same experiments, take them to the lab, and you'll still get the full whack of science from them that way. We need to get rid of you. We need to fire up that engine, and we need to start thrusting a bit harder than that. So the whole thing is just basically a way to turn sort of science and time into more science, which can be very handy if you've got a bit of patience and you're not in a huge rush. There we go. And, well, we're not tripping over ourselves to get further and further into the game. So we're all right. We'll get there. We'll get there at a decent pace, but we're not going to sort of do any exploiting mechanics to get there. What do we have here? We are going to Minmus. Minmus is our destination. We set that as our target. We're going to need to do a plane change maneuver very shortly. Let's get that set up. Add maneuver there. This is the ascending node, so we want to be burned down like that. Just fine-tune it. Try and get those nodes to about 90 degrees. Oh, they're being very fiddly today. Gently does it. Out you go. Come on. That should do us. Right, so now let's get turned around and pointing towards our maneuver node, because we're nearly there. Whilst I remember, I'm again going to deploy these solar panels, because otherwise I will forget. Yes. What was I saying? Yes, we're going to Minmus. 30-second burn. That's quite a lot. Because since we sort of last went there, we've picked up another science experiment. We've picked up the seismic accelerometer, or seismometer, depending on whichever one you fancy using. And we haven't actually used that on any of the biomes in Minmus. So what we're going to do a bit of a geological survey of Minmus. We're just going to go to lots of different biomes and perform that one experiment, as opposed to the previous missions where we went to one biome and did several experiments. Fine-tune this. There we go. Right on the money. Let's get our path to Minmus sorted out. We're not going to be too fussed because about sort of free returns or going to the other way, just to we just want to get there, because once we are there, we're going to try and go into a polar orbit. And it's, for Minmus, it can actually be less of a hassle just to sort of get there and then adjust your orbit, particularly if you've got, if your orbit, if you fly past, as it will be, has certain characteristics. Let's see, what's our periapsis there? Minmus periapsis, we could almost do with it being a bit further away. Let's just come at it like that. Yeah, that will do. Oh, I just clicked on something. It hasn't made a major difference. It'll be fine. When you hover over one of these and rotate the mouse wheel, it sort of counts as sort of clicking in it and dragging it, and I just did that, and I don't know which node I clicked on, but it hasn't made a massive difference, and we're going to be asking about with our orbits when we get there anyway, so shouldn't be a problem. Let's just start to time warp forward. So anyway, how are we going to be doing those experiments? Sorry, I realised I haven't got on to explaining, even starting to explain what on earth this is, but we'll get there, don't worry. There's method to the madness, or madness to the method, one or the other. There's some method and there's some madness, and it doesn't really pay to sort of dwell on how much of each one you have in there. Let's just see, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Let's start pointing ourselves prograde, because this is going to be a long old burn. 1 minute 47. I am going to try burning at 53 seconds. I think that should be bang on the money. And there. Right, so let's just tilt ourselves so we get the full thing of solar panels. Just because it looks nicer and it's sort of good practice, as it were, but doesn't really matter. We've got this engine which generates electricity running full pelt, so it doesn't really change anything. Anyway, we are going to Minmus, and we're going to need to do a lot whilst we're there. So the fuel we have in this vehicle probably isn't enough to go there, do all our manoeuvres, come back, do all the manoeuvres we need, because we're going to need to dock with the Aristotle station, as well as taking this little probe. And well, the Brunel orbiter is going to sort of act as a mothership. So this little probe here, it sort of separates from there. It's got 8 of these little seismic accelerometers around that little detachable part there. I'll explain the reason for that a bit later if I don't forget. And that's going to go down, do an experiment, fly up a bit, found another biome, do the seismometer experiment, fly up, find another biome. It starts to run out of fuel. It can come back up to the mothership, dock, refuel, and go back down. I mean, I could have done this sort of entirely unmanned, just with different stages. I couldn't guarantee how many biomes I could get, so instead of doing a fully unmanned mission, we're doing a semi-unmanned mission, just to make sure we get there, get what we want, and get back again, and can dock with the space station. Our manoeuvre is coming to its end. Oh, we were pointing towards the wrong thing. We were pointing prograde rather than at the manoeuvre node. Let's just see where that takes us at the moment. Yeah, we need to fine-tune that, otherwise we are not gonna get our encounter. This is obviously the part of the manoeuvre where I clicked on something else accidentally. Separation at closest approach. Down, 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 down. There we go, that's the stuff. I'm going to get it down to about 1.5. That'll do us. Right, so we are on our way. I'll spare you the trip over there, and I will see you again in a second. Right, so here we are. We have just entered Minmus's sphere of influence, and we have a bunch of manoeuvres to do. The first one, of course, is to do a retrograde burn and get ourselves in orbit around Minmus. We don't have to be too accurate with, like, the periaps node, because we're going to be dragging our orbit right down to it. Well, much closer to Minmus than it currently is. We are quite a long way out here. So we are going to need to kill our speed. Almost dead. That's probably going to be close enough, actually. Let's start our burn. Fire up the engines all the way. Ram that throttle full open. And the orbital path is just barely moving, even as our speed drops below 100. Let's just see, should be there. And how far out is that? Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag this periapsis so it's just inside the surface of Minmus, putting us on a collision course, because we have an opportunity to lose some dead weight here. So we have this fuel tank here. That is a ton dry mass. That's a ton we don't need. I think we brought this along because otherwise we wouldn't have enough fuel for the whole mission, but I think, yeah, we've got more than enough space in these fuel. Oh, they're nearly out, actually. So let's transfer the fuel across from here. I don't think I'm going to bother transferring any monopropellant because I think we've got enough. We don't need... What's happened there? I must have clicked on something. We don't need that additional monopropellant. I don't think we need as much monopropellant as we've got. It's just going to be for docking, and if the probe needs to come up, well, whenever the probe will need to come and redock anyway. But if it needs to do any additional hops up to refuel and then go back down. And then, of course, when we get back to the space station to deliver our little bit of science there, then we're going to need it. But I don't think we need the additional monopropellant we've got here. So that's just more mass we can get rid of. So where are we? Where is Minmus? Minmus is there, just almost hidden in the sun's glare. So what we are going to do, I'm going to try getting everything the same way up on the nav ball. So for the Brunel orbiter, and then when I undock the probe, I will need to turn on the antennae for the probe, because you need an active antenna if you want to control unmanned tech now in Kerbal Space Program. Well, you don't have to. I mean, there is a mod in the difficult. Well, there's an option in the difficulty settings that means you don't have to do that. But just a little bit of flavour, a little bit of extra realism. So I just keep that on. I think we're drifting forward a little bit. And just wait till we're sort of clear of that fuel tank, and then I'll just stop us. I think that should be sufficient. The probe's quite small. Oop, wrong way. There we go, back to here. We are going to undock our probe. You see I've got this little docking adapter going from the docking port junior to the standard size docking port. We go to you, we're going to want to turn on you, we're going to want to turn on you. Yes, I turned off all the fuel tanks on the probe just so just because I don't want anything to use the probe's fuel apart from the probe when it's on a mission. So now we want to get you turning the same way up on the nav ball, just so it's easier as I'm switching back and forth. I don't get confused. They're all orientated the same way. Control from here. Set as target. We are going to want to just kill our forward velocity and then thrust upwards. This isn't that stable. It tends to wobble a lot. Tends to wobble a lot when you thrust with the RCS, so I think I'm going to have to sort of line this up by eye, because this is going to cause this to wobble all over the place. And not to be that useful. Oh, I did say I'd mention the sort of the detachable sensor suite that's on the probe. I just do that. It's something I normally do with my in my saves. It just means that if needs be, I can going a bit too fast. If needs be, I can just take this off with another vehicle, take it back down to Kerbin, or reattach another one with another vehicle, and then we can just refuel and reuse the probe without actually having to launch. Without having to launch another one, so it's just means you get more for the launches you do, and that has docked. I thought that might slip off for a second, but no, all is good. So yeah, it's just a little more convenient. You have to do fewer launches and all that. You are going to drift off there. Next thing, we're not going to lift our periapsis just yet because we want to go into a polar orbit. The reason for a polar orbit being, of course, that you sort of fly sort of vertically like that as the planet rotates slowly beneath you. It means that eventually you'll be above or very close to sort of every biome that you want to reach. So that's our next job. You're close to the retrograde. Turn off the RCS so we don't get the annoying SAS thrusts. So where is... Minimus is there. We are going that way around. So we are going that way around. So we want to point ourselves up like that. That's the anti-normal node, so we want to point there. And then we just very gently thrust. It doesn't take a lot. That's just because our actual velocity is so slow. It just doesn't take a lot at all to do a plane change. Using very little delta V to do that. And now we can point ourselves prograde and start to lift that periapsis up. I think it had already gone above. Where's our little bit of debris there? I hope that's still going to crash into the planet. Where are we? 12. Going to go, as I said, a little over 24,000, as that gives us an extra notch on the time acceleration if we need it. Right, so that's all done there. Let's time warp round to our periapsis. 50 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, still barely moving. Yeah, that thing's going to crash into there nicely. Yeah. Just as we accelerate, bring ourselves round here, get our orbit circularized, and that should be that. We're going to be wanting to point retrograde when we do get there. Can speed this up a little more. Right, there we go. Just start thrusting a bit there. Other thing I did say I'd mention earlier in the the series. I said that if I ever sort of used a new mod, I'd mention it. So I've been using I've used tweak scale on this. Some of these parts on this probe, very useful mod. Just allows you to sort of size things up or down, literally tweak their scale. So I've used it on these fuel tanks because we don't need a fuel tank with 20 monopropellant in it, and it's actually lighter than just getting a full-sized RCS tank and just filling it with 5. And I've done the same with these RCS thrusters because we don't need full-size RCS thrusters. We don't need the power. We certainly don't need the weight, and that was taking a fair chunk out of the delta V of this probe. So I've just done it like that. Let's stop thrusting there for a second. I want to get it this orbit reasonably circularized because it will just help if we do need to bring the probe will eventually need to come up to dock, as I said, but you know, in that case, the more circular the orbit, that sort of tends to help. You don't have to faff about too much tweaking it. Yes, so anyway, tweak scale. It's one of those mods that tends to come packaged with other mods. That's how I think how most people sort of get hold of it. But if you don't have any of the mods that include it and you want it, I'm sure you'll be able to find it relatively simply. That's pretty circular. I don't think I can complain about that. So there we are. We are in our orbit. We need to decide where we're going to go. I want to start on one of the poles. The south looks a bit too bumpy. The north is looking flatter, so I think we're going to go round there. We are currently going south. I think this video has been going south for a while. But once we get all the way round up to the other side, we'll detach the probe and we will go for a landing. But that's not going to be happening today because unfortunately time has run away with us. So we are going to need to save that and continue it later. So that's all for today, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, we will continue this at a later date. But until then, thanks for watching. Take care. And I'll see you next time.